We're back today with the Bishop Larry Gaiters. Bishop, greetings and welcome back. We were cut off so abruptly last week.
Absolutely, but it's so great to be back on Crowdsource the Truth, and really looking forward to unpacking this eugenics of identity politics today. Very exciting.
Yeah, and I know that Crowdsource the Truth viewers are excited for you to be here. You've been bringing forward information that many people have never heard about before. I briefly wanted to address, before we begin, Bishop, last week's mishap. A lot of people presumed because it happened twice in a row and that it only happened on your show while there were so many other shows being produced, that it had to be outside interference, someone directly targeting you. But we do not have direct evidence of that. As you and I were discussing over the weekend and before the show, it did seem to be related to the use of Google Earth, and I would go even one better. I think it has to do with the temperature of the computer, and Google Earth is very resource intensive. It causes the computer to use its graphics processing unit, more of its central processing unit, and I believe it caused the computer to overheat. One other commonality between your shows that maybe wasn't the case with some of my other guests is that you're bringing up so much information so fast and furiously that I'm racing to bring these things up, and I think it was taxing the computer. So what I've done today, Bishop, is I kept the window open, and it is frigid in the room right now. I'm wearing a sweater to keep myself warm, but hopefully the computer will stay under control so we can get through your presentation today.
Absolutely. And you know what? This is a very exciting time right now. And the platform that you have through Crowdsource the Truth is actually transforming and you know, the mindset of your listeners all over the world. And my assignment and job and responsibility is to stretch the minds of your listeners, so that when I let go of these minds will never return back to its original form or shape. So we're really looking forward to getting into this eugenics of identity politics and exposing the Nation of Islam in its roots.
Absolutely. And again, before we get into that, I want to remind our viewers, if they're not familiar with the Bishop, or if they want to learn more about him and the global spiritual revolution, you can follow the Bishop on Twitter. He is there at Bishop L. Gaiters, and you can listen to him on the radio. He's on Life Radio 92.9 FM, 1460 AM, and you can also get him on iHeart Radio. The Bishop is syndicated all over the world. He's got so many listeners. It really is a privilege to have him with us here on Crowdsource the Truth, where he can help us all learn about the history of some of these things that have been right in front of our faces, even though we don't know it.
Absolutely. And let's begin to unpack this again, Jason. Very excited today for today's program in concerning this eugenics series entitled Eugenics, the Eugenics of Identity Politics. Again, the eugenics of identity politics in peeling back to the very core of the Nation of Islam. And later, probably next week, we'll begin to unlayer, pull back the layers concerning its connection in history to the Church of Scientology. Now, last week we left off concerning Wallace Deed Ford, or Fard, which the Nation of Islam calls their God, Master Farad Muhammad. And we gave kind of a schematical foundation of the origins of the Nation of Islam, going back actually to the spirit of the 1300s with the Thuggee Seeker Society in India, and moving forward to the 1920s when Dr. Muhammad Sadiq is commissioned by Mirza Ghulam to leave India, specifically England, where Dr. Mufti Muhammad Sadiq was, to come to the United States in the 1920s to establish the first caliphate or Islamic leadership through Sharia law in the United States of America in order to destabilize the United States of America by exploiting and manipulating the emotions of Black America. All right. So then now we left off on last week concerning this character of Wallace D. Ford or Fard, where in 1918, Jason, he severely beats a patron at a restaurant in Los Angeles, California. This patron's name was P.W. Gillibrand, was beating this man and pistol whipping this man because Mr. Gillibrand did not pay for his meal. So then Wallace D. Ford, or also known as Richard Ford. Now remember that name, Richard Ford. I'm going to bring this up later in the program in connection to the Black Panther Party in the 1960s and 70s, Richard Ford. Now in January of 20th of 1926, Wallace D. Ford or Fard was arrested for violating the California prohibition law for selling and distributing alcohol. Now, in February of that same year, he was again arrested by the LAPD for selling narcotics or drugs in his restaurant to an undercover FBI agent. All right. Wow. This was February 1926. And I believe I sent you a few photos, but one of the photos I sent to you, Jason, is this Wallace Dodd Ford, or Wally Dodd Ford's mugshot at San Quentin, his San Quentin mugshot. So he befriends a very interesting character by the name of Edward Donaldson. Now, according to the FBI, Jason, Edward Donaldson is a Chinese American with Japanese ties to the underworld. Let me say that again because this is very important. So then Edward Donaldson, who was a Chinese American, but yet had close ties to the Japanese underworld, okay, or the Yakuza, and also to the Black Dragon Society, befriends Wallace D. Ford or Fard, and both of these characters are sent to San Quentin and serve a prison term of not less or more than 3 years from 1926 to 1929. And later we're going to kind of expose the Nation of Islam's connection to another Oriental person with close ties to both Japanese intelligence and to the Japanese mafia called the Yakuza, and his name was Sato Kata Takahashi. Again, Sato Kata, capital Satokata Takahashi. That's capital Takahashi, who was not only a member of the Black Dragon Society, the same secret society in Japan that the close friend of Wallace Dodd Ford was a member of, and that was Edward Donaldson. But this Takahashi character, born in 1870, died in 1945, not to get ahead of ourselves here, as we're talking about the eugenics of identity politics, this Takahashi character is a member of the Black Dragon Secret Society, which is the intelligence arm of the Yakuza mob or mafia in Japan. So
Excuse me, Bishop, just for a moment. Isn't it rather unusual for a Chinese person to be involved with Yakuza? My understanding is that the Japanese and the Chinese hate each other, and I've personally experienced in Japan quite a bit of racism, particularly against Black people.
Absolutely, but it's very interesting that according to the FBI affidavit dated in 1928, and that's a very interesting point that you just made, Jason, that the mother of Edward Donaldson was Japanese. His father was Chinese. So if the father is Chinese, and as we're talking about the Asiatic family structure of Asian families, if the father is Chinese, then the child is Chinese, regardless of the ethnicity of the mother. But that's a very important point that you just made, that Edward Donaldson, who was one of the best friends of Wallace D. or Dodd Ford, was heavily watched and monitored by the FBI during the 1920s, and he had close connections to both the Japanese underworld of the Yakuza and also to Japanese intelligence, even though he was a Chinese American.
Wow.
That's kind of a paradox. But later on, this Takahashi person during the 1930s and 40s, this Sato Kata Takahashi person, who has close ties to the Japanese underworld of the Yakuza and also to Japanese intelligence before and during World War II, is a close friend of Elijah Muhammad. Okay? And to all of your listeners, if you get a chance, examine the book, The Rise of the Black Dragon Society. Again, The Rise of the Black Dragon Society by author B.B. Lee. Now, as we move forward here with these connections, as we are exposing the origins or the historicity of the Nation of Islam. Now, after W.D. Fard is released from prison in 1929, he moves east to Chicago, Illinois. And for a while, Jason, he joins the Chicago chapter, just for a short period of time, of Marcus Garvey's fledgling UNIA, the Universal Negro Improvement Association, located at the Chicago, Illinois chapter, okay? Because 2 years prior, and we talked about this back in June, Dr. Marcus Garvey is deported from the United States of America back to his homeland of Jamaica back in November 1927. Now, getting back to 1929, so W.D. Fard joins the Chicago chapter of the UNIA, but he leaves that organization, Jason, and joins Noble Drew Ali. We talked about him on last week.
Yeah.
Joins the Moorish Science Temple of America that, according to the FBI affidavit dated, okay, in 1928, that Noble Drew Ali and the Moorish Science Temple of America also has close ties to the Japanese underworld and to Japanese intelligence. Now, what I don't understand, what connection does the Japanese Empire during that time, before and during and after World War II, but specifically before and during World War II, have anything to do with Black America? Well, just like Dr. Mufti Muhammad Sadiq in 1920 came as a Trojan horse of the global elite to establish the first caliphate in America by using Black America as a pawn to destabilize America through Black organizations, Black movements, and the Black consciousness movements later in the 1960s. Now the Japanese Empire is using Black America as a Trojan horse. They're coming in as a Trojan horse, the Japanese Empire. And it's interesting that, remember Operation Paperclip?
Yeah.
Right after World War II, when the United States was extraditing or bringing Nazi scientists out of Europe after World War II. Now, there was a secret intelligence OSS operation called Operation Downfall. Okay. Now, originally, Operation Downfall was used as a last resort to send in American troops near the end of World War II into Japan. But what happened? President Truman dropped 2 atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and so they didn't need Operation Downfall. But quickly here, as we are dissecting the origins of the Nation of Islam and the connection to the Japanese Empire, through the eugenics of identity politics, this Operation Downfall continues, Jason, when the United States government, after World War II is over, uses Japanese scientists, but more specifically, Japanese counter-espionage interrogators and spies, and sends them to the United States after World War II to really destabilize Black America, to use them through the Black consciousness movements like the Nation of Islam. For what? To destabilize the United States of America. I find that to be fascinating.
Yeah.
So as we move forward here in 1929, this Wallace D. Ford, or better known as David Ford L., E.L., in the Moorish Science Temple of America, joins the Moorish Science Temple of America in 1929 in Chicago, Illinois. Now, that picture that you have there of the 1928 convention. Now, to your listeners' left, the left of the woman sitting on the front row, to your listeners' left, but to the woman's right, is the prophet noble Jew Ali. Now, to the woman's left, which would be to your listeners' right, the taller gentleman is Claude Green. Now, Claude Green, according to the FBI, was the butler of Julius Rosenwald. Julius Rosenwald, the founder and the creator of the Sears Roebuck Company, was approached by Claude Green, in 1928 to purchase the building at 3140 South Indiana Avenue. And Julius Rosenwald bought the building for Claude Green. Now, see, Julius Rosenwald, Jason, is too shrewd and smart and intelligent, too shrewd of a businessman just to go and give his money to a African-American butler, not the downcast Black folk, and to buy a building, but not knowing why he was buying the building for. Okay? So Julius Rosenwald knew of the Moorish Science Temple of America. Now, that building at 3140 South Indiana Avenue that's still standing today, Jason, was originally built back in 1887 by the Chicago, Illinois chapter of B'nai B'rith. It's part of the Anti-Defamation League.
Wow.
This is against B'nai B'rith. They're doing great work today, but that's another topic for another day concerning their history and their origins in connection to Abraham Lincoln's assassination. Okay, that's another topic I don't want to get into. But in 1887, Julius Rosenwald bought this building later in the early 1900s. But in 1887, that building, Unity Hall, where you see the picture of the Moorish Science Temple members convention in front of that building, was once bought by the Chicago, Illinois chapter of B'nai B'rith of the Anti-Defamation League in 1887. So in 1887, that building, Jason, was called the Lakeside Club for the higher echelon of rich Jewish merchants in Chicago, Illinois. Nothing wrong with that, okay? We're not downcasting my Jewish brothers and sisters. So B'nai B'rith not only built the building, but owned the building until the early 1900s. And then, of course, Julius Rosenwald bought the building around in 1925. Now, Claude Green is eventually murdered. And the question is why? Claude Green then begins to expose Noble Drew Ali as a fraud. Because Noble Drew Ali, who had many wives, Jason, took one of Noble Drew Ali's women. Noble Drew Ali took one of Claude Green's women, actually his fiancée, and Noble Drew Ali not only married Claude Green's fiancée, but got her pregnant before they got married. Okay, wow. Sounds like a soap opera. So then Claude Green blackmails Noble Drew Ali, and you can find this also in vault.fbi.gov, vault.fbi.gov. And according to the FBI affidavit in 1928 and also in 1929, through the pen of J. Edgar Hoover, that Claude Green was murdered by the upper echelon of the Moorish Science Temple of America on the orders of Noble Jew Ali, that at the time, Jason, of Claude Green's murder, Noble Jew Ali was out of town. And before he left town, he left a young man in charge of the Moorish Science Temple of America. And that young man was named Wallace D. Ford or Fard, who later, the following year, July 4th, 1930, begins the Nation of Islam in Detroit, Michigan. So then Noble Jew Ali leaves town to provide himself an alibi for the murder of Claude Green. Okay? So then Claude Green is murdered because he was about to expose Noble Jew Ali as a fraud, taking millions of dollars from the African American community, not just in Chicago, but actually all over the world. Because at that time, Jason, the Moorish Science Temple of America, though they had 17 temples here in the United States, but they had 35,000 followers worldwide. Mm-hmm. So this man, Timothy Drew, or Noble Jew Ali, was raking in millions of dollars.
Sorry, now, Bishop, let me just ask you, you said they had 35,000 followers worldwide?
35,000, now notice 35,000 followers worldwide. Not so much members, because they only had 17 temples in the United States, and I believe maybe an additional 30 temples around the world. When I mean followers versus members, a follower is a person that is a disciple, a adherent of the doctrine of the Moorish Science Temple of America, but not necessarily a member of the Moorish Science Temple of America. But yet this man, Timothy Drew, or Noble Jew Ali, was raking in millions of dollars. Claude Green was about ready to expose him because Claude Green's fiancée was impregnated by Noble Jew Ali, and Noble Jew Ali, who already had multiple wives under different names, okay, took his fiancée, Claude Green's fiancée, and married her. So then Claude Green is about to expose Noble Jew Ali as a fraud. So then in March of 1929, the soldiers, the assistants, the lay ministers of the local Moorish Science Temple of America, Unity Hall in Chicago, Illinois, murdered Claude Green. So Noble Jew Ali is out of town, but before he goes out of town into hiding, Jason, and this is fascinating, he leaves a young man by the name of W.D. Ford or Fard in charge. Now, later, the police catch up with Noble Jew Ali. They arrest him, okay, in the summer of 1929. And then when Noble Jew Ali gets out of jail, Jason, Noble Jew Ali mysteriously dies on the 20th of July in 1929. I'm not blaming W.D. Fard or Wallace D. Fard or the future members of the Nation of Islam for the murder of Noble Jew Ali. But it's very interesting that according to a lot of African American scholars, Jason, that they believe that without any substantial proof that Timothy Drew or Noble Jew Ali was poisoned and then murdered at his home by Wallace Dot Ford. There is no proof of that. But all of a sudden, this man, Noble Jew Ali, ends up dead in his home on July 20th, 1929. Okay? Now, it's interesting that the following year, Wallace Dart Ford tries to overtake and run the Moorish Science Temple of America, but is excommunicated by the higher echelon of leaders. And he moves to Detroit, Michigan, Jason, and begins on the 4th of July in 1930, the Nation of Islam, which was in the beginning called the Temple of Islam, Then the name was changed to the Nation of Islam on July 4th, 1930. 4 years later, Wallace D. Fard has to flee into hiding because both the Detroit Police Department and the FBI is after Wallace D. Fard or Muhammad because of a ritualistic murder that he sanctioned when one of his congregants, a young man by the name of James Kareem, whose real name is James Harris, had murdered one of the other brothers or congregants in that Detroit temple and mosque. And it was called, matter of fact, this ritualistic murder, that upon the sanctioning of W. Wallace D. Fard, he instructed Robert Kareem, capital Karriem, whose real name is Robert Harris, to murder a fellow brother in accordance to the secret rituals of the lost found Nation of Islam. Notice the secret rituals of the lost found Nation of Islam. This is, Jason, the public doesn't know this. There's rituals, satanic death rituals, which the Nation of Islam today and Farrakhan would deny to their dying breath.
You're saying they still practice them, Bishop?
Well, I do not know that. If they do continue this satanic ritualistic practice, I do not know. So that's something that we can really get into later, that I will have to really contact some former members of the Nation of Islam. But there was a book called The Secret Rituals of the Lost Found Nation of Islam, written by this Wallace Dodd Fard, this white man, who is the Mahdi, capital Mahdi, which is a Arabic word meaning redeemer. He is put up as God. Okay, so this man, Robert Kareem or Harris, kills another man, and he is deemed to be unfit for trial. And this is November 20th, 1932, Jason, according to the FBI reports there in the FBI local chapter office in Detroit, Michigan.
Sorry, Bishop, briefly, just to let you know, I found something about this, but it's in an Oxford Islamic Studies online library that requires me to log in, so I can't access it.
It's interesting. Isn't it interesting?
Teaching for the Lost Found Nation of Islam. Now, you know, you're causing me to think about the Mau Mau uprising, because the Mau Mau had a variety of very brutal indoctrination rituals, and what's the word I'm looking for? But they did this kind of thing, killing people, eating their eyeballs, killing babies of pregnant women.
And you know what? I'm so glad that you brought the Mau Mau. If we have time today or probably next week, we're going to talk about the Mau Mau in connection to Malcolm X. And he often refers to the Mau Mau and refers to the saying by any means necessary. Okay. Right. That was right. It was the right of African Americans to defend themselves. But killing those that would try to kill him. And later he kind of amended that stance when he left the Nation of Islam in March of 1964. But I'm glad that you brought that up. And now really, just let's keep a mental paperclip, Jason, concerning the Mau Mau, which was actually a CIA front in Africa, in Central Africa. I'll come to that later on, or maybe next week. So as we begin to unlayer this quickly here, this ritualistic killing. Now, it's interesting, Jason, that this Wallace D. Fard or Ford was married to two women and had a common law wife, a third woman, all at the same time. So allow me to lay this out. This is the God of Louis Farrakhan. This is the Mahdi, the Redeemer of all mankind. This Wallace Dodd Ford, or Richard Ford, put another mental paperclip there concerning Richard Ford in relation to the Black Panther Party in the 1960s. I'll get to in the next 5 to 10 minutes if we have time. So then, according to an FBI affidavit in 1933, okay, that Wallace Dodd Ford with used three of his aliases to marry two women and had a third woman as a common law wife. Now, his first woman, he married a woman by the name of Pearl Allen, okay, on May the 9th, 1914, where they had a child, okay? And there was a marriage certificate that was given to, remember, Carl Evans, the author of The Judas Factor, right? The plot to kill Malcolm X. He says that according to the Normal County, Oregon records, that a Fred Dodd, alias Wallace D. Ford, had married a Pearl Allen on the 9th of May, 1914. Also, according to the FBI affidavit in 1933, that later, Jason, on September 1st, 1920, 6 years later, after he marries Pearl Allen but never divorces her, he marries a woman by the name of Hazel Barton Ford. Okay, Hazel Barton, who later is Hazel Barton Ford. And there was a marriage certificate found by Carl Evans in his investigation. You'll find this in the book, The Judas Factor, the plot to kill Malcolm X, and also the second book from by Carl Evans, the Rise and Fall of Elijah Muhammad. He says that a Wallace D. Ford had a common-law wife. Now, to our listeners, the term common law means he was shacking up with this woman, if we can just say layman terms.
Yeah.
And he was not actually married to this woman. He was shacking up while married, okay, to Pearl Allen 6 years later at the same time. Now, here's a third woman, Jason, that comes onto the scene. 4 years later, after he meets this common law wife, Hazel Barton, on this June the 5th, 1924, there is a marriage certificate in Orange County, California, that Carl Evans, the author of The Judas Factor, The Plot to Kill Malcolm X, and The Rise and Fall of Elijah Muhammad, there is a marriage certificate issued to Wally Dodd Ford, a third alias of Wallace D. Muhammad. And Wally Dodd Ford marries a woman by the name of Carmen Trevino, capital Trev, like in Victor, I-N-O. So he is married to two women, and he has a common law wife, a third woman, all at the same time, Jason.
Where does he find time, Bishop?
Huh?
Where does he find the time?
Exactly. Well, now Farrakhan would tell you, Louis Farrakhan, whose real name is Louis Eugene Walcott, and mind you, the father of Louis Farrakhan, his real father, was a Jewish man of Portuguese origin or bloodline. I'm going to get into that later, or maybe next week if we have time.
You're saying Farrakhan's father is Jewish?
Yes, right. His name was Percival. Okay, his father, his name was Percival, and really an unknown character. But Farrakhan would tell you that his father was African, was from one of the islands in the Caribbean islands, I believe St. Kitts or Grenada. Huh. His mother was from Grenada, and he was saying that his father was either from St. Kitts or St. Nevis, but he gives multiple answers as to the background of his father, Percival, okay, Walcott, who is Jewish, but of Portuguese origin or blood. But yet this man is anti-Semitic.
Yeah.
I want to point that out there. So quickly here, so Wallace Dodd Ford in 1934 leaves Detroit, Michigan, because there is a warrant for his his arrest. Now, the Nation of Islam would tell you, well, the Detroit Police Department told him to leave. No, there was it was a warrant for Wallace Dodd Ford for him sanctioning, Jason, the ritualistic killing of one of his congregants through the hands of Mr. Kareem, okay? James Kareem, whose real name is James Harris. So I want to point that, or Robert Harris. So Robert Kareem Harris, or Robert Harris, on November 20th, 1932, is sanctioned, Jason, by Wallace D. Ford to kill another congregant to follow the rules of the secret rituals of the lost found Nation of Islam. Now, you asked the question a few minutes ago, a very powerful question. Does the Nation of Islam still do this practice? I do not know, but I'm going to find out, and hopefully I'll get some answers within the next week or two. Now, quickly here, as we got about maybe about 20, 24 minutes left here, as we are dissecting through the eugenics of identity politics here on Crowdsource the Truth, we are peeling back the layers of lies in this history of PSYOP, okay? Because the Nation of Islam, Jason, is nothing more than a deep state straw man PSYOP of manipulation, okay? Because a lot of your listeners, especially our white brothers and sisters, they have no idea about the origins and the history of the Nation of Islam. Now, quickly here, now I have to say this as well. Not only was Wallace D. Ford or Muhammad a white man born in New Zealand, but according to the Islamic Hadith, capital Hadith, in volume 2, Jason, number or page 122, it says that the Prophet Muhammad was a white man. Let me say this again. I don't say anything without factual proof. I am a researcher. I am an academic. So the Prophet Muhammad, according to the Hadith, capital Hadith. Now, for your listeners, the Hadith is the historical record of the life of the Prophet Muhammad. In volume 2, page or number 122, not only was the Prophet Muhammad white, but he was a brutal slave owner. That a lot of the names of his slaves are mentioned in the Islamic Hadith, volume 2, number or page 122, and a lot of his slaves are named from this acronym ABD or ADB. So ABD or ADB is the acronym, Jason, for African indigenous slaves. Those were code words for African slaves. So wait a minute, let me get this straight. So Louis Farrakhan, the Nation of Islam, and Elijah Muhammad, their God is a white man by the name of Wallace Dodd Ford, who has 58 aliases, born in New Zealand in February 25th, 1893. And they go by the teachings of the Quran written by the Prophet Muhammad, that according to their own historical records in the Hadith in volume 2, page 122 or number 122, he was a white man who was a brutal slave owner. This is hypocrisy, Jason. I want to point this out because this is some powerful information as we're dissecting the Nation of Islam through the eugenics of identity politics.
Yeah.
Now, I want to say this too, Jason. This is mind-blowing what I'm about to say. And I'm hoping and praying that a lot of African Americans are hearing me. I'm going to get into Malcolm X in about 2 to 3 minutes. The term Africa, Jason, was not the name of the original continent that we call Africa. Let me say this again. The term Africa was not the original name of the continent that we call Africa. Now, in 202 BC, Okay, keep a mental paper clip there as we're getting ready to go into Malcolm X. In 202 BC, there was a Roman general, Jason, by the name of Scipio Africanus, capital Scipio, then the last name Africanus, capital African, like in Nancy or no, US. So Scipio Africanus was a 5-star general and a warrior and a tacticianer who defeated Hannibal, who was a black general from Carthage, which is present-day Libya, and defeated Hannibal and Carthage. And after Hannibal's defeat, changed the name, and the original name of the continent was not Africa. It was a Coptic word or name, Kemet. Write it down, capital Kemet. Now, Kemet or Kemet Nu, or the acronym capital K, capital M, capital T, Jason, is the acronym for the term Kemet. And Kemet, which is the original name of the continent, is the Egyptian Coptic interpretation that reveals the word Eden, capital E-D-E-N, like the Garden of Eden.
Yeah.
Well, this is powerful stuff here. So here, as we're breaking down the eugenics of identity politics and why people call themselves African, African American, African Canadians, African Caribbeans, African British, or African English. So then, when Scipio Africanus defeated Hannibal near the end of the Second Punic War in 202 BC, Jason, General Scipio Africanus changed the name of the continent from Kemet, which means Eden in the Coptic text, to Africanus, which is called Africa today. And let me say this to a lot of our young African American brothers and sisters. Stop calling yourself African American, African Canadian, African Caribbean, because that is the last name of a Roman general that defeated Hannibal in 202 BC. Jason, this is powerful.
Yeah.
And so 80% of the names of African nations on the continent of Africa are actual names that represent the families of throughout the Roman and Greek Empire. Another topic for another day.
And you know, Bishop, I never use the term African American because I've always found it awkward. Nobody ever refers to me as a European American, and I've even heard people call black Canadians African American, so it's like an ignorant term.
It's an ignorant term, and not to get away from the eugenics of identity politics as we are dissecting the origins of the Nation of Islam, and later, probably next week, its connection to the origins of the Church of Scientology. You made mention of the term Europe. Now, according to the Oxford Dictionary of European History, the term Europe, capital E-U-R-O-P-E, not to get away from the Nation of Islam, Europe was named after a African female slave that was enslaved by Aristotle. Her name was Europa, capital E-U-R, okay? U-P-A, or capital E-U-R-E-P-A, depending on the spelling and the pronunciation. So when we're talking about Europa, and you hit a nerve with me when you said the word Europe. So Europa, capital E-U-R-O-P-A, according to the Oxford Dictionary of Greek history, and European history, but specifically Greek Hellenistical history, Europe was named after a black female slave of Aristotle by the name of Europa, capital E-U-R-O-P-A, which means princess. So all of Europe, which is mostly white, and we're not talking white, black teaching here today, is named after a black African female princess who was a slave of Aristotle. So, and the reason why I'm bringing out the terms Africanus, Africa, Europe, is to let Black people know that your identity is not in a continent or a pigmentation, but your identity is in God, the Lord Jesus Christ. Another teaching for another day. Now, let's get back to the eugenics of identity politics. And another thing I got to say also, Jason, remember when the movie King Kong came out in Hollywood, I believe in the 20s and 30s, right?
Yeah, the original.
Yeah, the original King Kong. Now, capital Kong, which is the Dutch interpretation of the word Kong with the C, capital Cong, which is the acronym for the word Congolese or the term Congo, which represents the Republic of the Congo in Central Africa or Kemet or Eden today. So I just wanted to point that out, that's a racist term, King Kong, but Kong is more the Dutch acronym for the term Kong with the C, Cong, which is transliterated, Jason, into the word Congolese or the Congo. Mm-hmm. Now Malcolm X comes on the scene. He was born on May the 19th, 1925. Now, at the time, when Malcolm comes into the Nation of Islam, matter of fact, he's in prison from 1946 to 1952. Now, from 1952 to 1953, the Nation of Islam, Jason, only had 300 members. Only 300. So Malcolm, when he gets out of prison in 1952, builds the Nation of Islam to almost 500,000 people.
Wow.
Okay. Which the apex of this number is in 1965, the year that he was assassinated. So Malcolm X grows up in a home. His father was a strong Baptist minister. His name was Reverend Earl Little. His mother, she was actually white, Jason.
Malcolm X's mother?
Yeah, Malcolm X's mother. Her father was white. Her father raped her mother.
Ooh.
Okay. So Malcolm X's mother was a woman by the name of Louise Helen Little. Okay. Now, Louise Helen Little was the secretary for the Lansing, Michigan chapter of the UNIA, Marcus Garvey's Universal Negro Improvement Association. Reverend Earl Little was the local president chapter in Lansing, Michigan. Now, Malcolm X is born in Omaha, Nebraska on May the 19th, 1925. The family moves to Lansing, Michigan later. And then Malcolm X's father, Earl Little, owns a farm. So Malcolm X's father was a strong black man. At any time, I'm speaking also to our young African-American men and women, anytime you see a strong black leader in history, whether it is a Malcolm X or a Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., going back to Hannibal, okay, around 202 BC, okay, any black strong leader in history, even the boxer Jack Johnson, these men had strong black fathers. And Jason, the greatest tragedy, as we're talking about the eugenics of identity politics here on Crowdsource the Truth, as we're dissecting the origins of the Nation of Islam, the greatest tragedy to Black America is not racism. The greatest tragedy to Black America today, Jason, is the lack of fathers in Black homes. Jason, that's the tragedy. Because when you have a father there, and regardless of the race or the creed or the ethnicity of the father, when you have a man in the home as the father, he can teach his son and daughter how to navigate around racism and how to properly deal with it, not through the barrel of emotionalism, but through the power of intellect. And so then, there was a conspiracy through the left, through Lyndon Baines Johnson, concerning the Great Society in 1964, the passage of not just the Civil Rights Amendment in law, but also the passage that created the welfare state in the American ghetto industrial complex from 1964 onward. Different topic for a different day.
Did you say ghetto industrial complex, Bishop?
The ghetto industrial complex. Now, remember back in June, Jason, I made mention of the Robert Taylor homes in Chicago, right? Mm-hmm. It was built in the 60s, and I believe it was torn down. The last building was turned down in the mid-2000s, maybe 2004, 2005. But not to get away from Malcolm X and eugenics of identity politics as we're dissecting the origins of the Nation of Islam. But the Robert Taylor homes, okay, in Chicago, was named after a boule by the name of Robert Taylor, who headed and directed the Chicago Housing Authority under the daily machine of the left, okay? So then the family of Richard Daley, okay, family dynasty of the left.
He was the mayor of Chicago, wasn't he?
Yes, he was the mayor of Chicago, and so was his son later. So it's interesting that Mayor Daley did not even invite Robert Taylor to the dedication of this plantation, the Robert Taylor homes, for whom the plantation was named after him.
Why is that?
Because of his racist views, using Robert Taylor as a prop, as a token. This is what the left does. The right doesn't do this. We as conservatives and Republicans, we don't teach tokenism, and we don't promote tokenism. The left does this, okay? The Democratic Party that uses race and gender and color and the emotionalism of black folk to manipulate the ignorance of people on the left to divide and conquer the United States of America. So then Robert Taylor, through Mayor Daley, had established this ghetto industrial complex. Now, the ghetto industrial complex, not to leave Malcolm X, okay, thank you so much for showing that Wikipedia story outline of Mayor Richard J. Daley, who was an ardent supporter of segregation in Chicago, Illinois. Now, remember to our historians, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. came to Chicago, I believe in 66 and 67, and said that the city of Chicago, Illinois, was more segregated than any city in the United States of America, including the South, Jason, under the leadership of Richard J. Daley.
And look at what just happened recently with, what's his name, Jesse Smollett.
I'm so glad that you brought him up. Jesse Smollett, before we get into Malcolm X. See, Jesse Smollett is a tool of the left. And Jason, Jesse Smollett is related to Senator Kamala Harris. Jesse Smollett is related to Senator Kamala Harris, who recently dropped out of the Democratic presidential campaign. Okay? So Kamala Harris is, and not to get away from Malcolm X, and you're such a great host, Jason, because you hit nerves with me that opens other doors that I normally wouldn't even talk about. I'm glad that you brought up Jesse Smollett. But Kamala Harris, her mother was of Indian origin. Her mother in San Francisco, California, her family came from India, promoted communism and socialism within the government in the nation of India. So Kamala Harris's parents, especially her mother, was a radical communist, leftist, ideological person. That's the psychology of not just Kamala Harris, but Jesse Smollett and the left. And Jesse Smollett, part of the Underground Network, actually he's a known homosexual, okay, was used as a token to get him out of the mess that he's in. And actually, Jason, the FBI is still after him. Another topic for another day. Okay, I'm so glad that you brought him up. And can I say this too before we get to Malcolm X? Remember last week, one of the assassins that I made mention to you, Jason, a man by the name of William X. Bradley in New Jersey. I think he died recently. I'm not sure. You can look that up. So William X. Bradley, one, great pictures there, Jason, one of the four assassins that murdered Malcolm X. William X. Bradley and his wife, Jason, get this, was the political and financial supporter of one, Cory Booker.
I was going to say, this guy lives in Newark, where Cory Booker was the mayor.
Cory Booker, who was running to be the mayor of Newark, New Jersey some years ago.
He was the mayor.
Yeah, that's right. He was the mayor of Newark, New Jersey, was in a political ad with this killer, one of the killers of Malcolm X.
Wow.
Okay. This Bradley guy who was one of the assassins, of Malcolm X. Wait a minute. So he is the political and financial supporter of Cory Booker. Another topic for another day. Now, what you're showing there, Jason, and not to get ahead of myself here, but that stretcher came from a hospital that was across the street from the Audubon. Then the Audubon, 8 days prior, was purchased by Circle Group in the United Kingdom. But the Audubon that was purchased by the Circle Group 8 days before the assassination of Malcolm X, back on February the 12th, which was a Friday, the Circle Group bought the Audubon ballroom from 20th Century Fox, Jason. 20th Century Fox, through the Fox Group, once owned the Audubon ballroom.
Disney owns it now.
And the Circle
Fox, I mean.
Yeah, absolutely. Interesting. So Malcolm, and matter of fact, that stretcher there, the hospital was practically across the street, okay? But it took them 45 minutes to an hour to get the stretcher across the street to the Audubon.
Huh.
And the hospital said there was no stretchers in the hospital at that time. Really? Now, Malcolm X, arrested in 1946 for picking up a stolen watch. He serves a 8 to 10 year bit sentence at the Charlestown State Prison for larceny and breaking and entering in Massachusetts.
Wow.
He meets a man who's connected to Elijah Muhammad in the Nation of Islam. Okay. In prison, Malcolm Little his nickname was not just Little Red, but Satan. And the reason why they called Malcolm Little Satan, because of his hatred for God and Christianity. He had a low tolerance, Jason, for Christianity and for God, because his father, Earl Little, though Earl Little loved little Malcolm, but also looked at Malcolm in a disdain attitude. Why? Because Malcolm, out of his 6 brothers and sisters, Jason, was the lightest complexion of the siblings of Earl and Louise Little. And even Louise Little, who loved little Malcolm, but yet made him work more in the fields, as far as doing chores, more than any other sibling. And so Malcolm grows up who is emotionally and psychologically wounded through rejection from both his father and mother. Now, even the Shabazz family today, the children of Malcolm X, they'll deny this, But when we study the emotional development of Malcolm Little, who becomes Malcolm X, there's a lot of trauma, Jason, Mm-hmm. And so then when Earl Little is killed by the local KKK in Lansing, Michigan, and his body was decapitated on a railroad line.
Boy.
And mind you, after his body was almost decapitated, Earl Little lived for another 15, 20 minutes. That was trauma to the early life of Malcolm X, who was Malcolm Little.
But it sounds also a lot like the brutal rituals of the Mau Mau.
Interesting. That's a powerful connect, which I never thought about. You see the connection here? Talking about the ritualistic murder of his father, Earl Little, to the ritualistic murders of the Mau Mau. This has to be so emotionally and psychologically damaging to Malcolm Little, which develops into Malcolm X. Great analogy there, Jason. So then his mother eventually has a nervous breakdown.
Wow.
His mother has a nervous breakdown because physically and mentally, she can't be chasing 6 kids around the farm. She loses the farm, and she is sent to a sanitarium at the Kalamazoo State Hospital in Kalamazoo, Michigan in 1938. So Louise Helen Little was in that hospital all the way up until near the assassination of Malcolm X. Malcolm X got his mother out of that Kalamazoo State Hospital, I believe a year or two before his assassination. So then these brothers and sisters, Jason, of Malcolm Little, are sent to foster homes. They go into the foster home system there in the state of Michigan. And then as we come in here, that Malcolm in high school was voted class president. He is very intelligent, the smartest kid, not just in his class, but in the local high school there in Lansing, Michigan. And he stood up and told his teacher and to the rest of the students, Malcolm Little, wanted to be a lawyer. The teacher said, Jason, and I quote, being a lawyer, Little Malcolm, he called him Little Malcolm. He didn't call anyone else Little, but he called him Little Malcolm. Little Malcolm, being an attorney is not a realistic goal for a NIGGER in front of the whole class. Again, this is more emotional wounding and damage to Malcolm X. Okay?
And Bishop, at that time, was it a segregated class, or it was black children and white children together?
It was a segregated class. Well, even though there were black and white children in the same class, but the black children were separated, okay?
Within the class?
In the class. They were sat in the back of the class, including Malcolm. And so this had to be emotionally destructive to the psychic of Malcolm Little, that when he quits high school, Jason, okay, and he moves to Boston, Massachusetts, right? Quits high school and lives with his half sister, a woman by the name of Ella Little Collins. Now, Ella Collins, his half sister, was the daughter of his father, but not the daughter of his mother. Interesting. And so then Malcolm leaves, after he leaves high school and quits high school, lives with his half sister, and then leaves Boston and comes here to New York City and gets into drugs and alcohol. Malcolm Little becomes a pimp. Cool. Malcolm Little, oh yes. And before all of this was happening to Malcolm Little, because of his decisions, because of all of this being rooted back in his pain of his childhood. And I'm not giving him a pass because of this, Jason, but to really dissect for your listeners the emotional pain in the root of the rootology of Malcolm Little's past, which made him into Malcolm X. So Malcolm Little gets hired as a waiter on these trains going from New York to Boston and St. Louis. And so he's not making enough money as a waiter working on these trains, these segregated trains, so he gets into drugs and alcohol. He becomes a pimp. He dates a young white girl by the name of Bey. Interesting. B-E-Y, which is also the first 3 letters of the term Beyonce. Another topic for today. So He falls in love with this white girl. I know we're almost done here. And then Malcolm along, he has a friend that's working with him and robbing homes. And so thereby he gets arrested in 1946 and serves an 8 to 10 year bit or sentence in prison. Okay. But he serves 6 years from 1946 to 1952. He's a member of the debate team in prison, Jason.
Didn't realize they had that.
Oh, yeah. So he debated against some of the smartest students of these Ivy League schools of Harvard and Yale and Brown University and destroys them by all accounts. And so he gets out of prison in 1952. Elijah Muhammad sends money to get him because Malcolm Little, who becomes Malcolm X, is broke, busted, and was disgusted, leaves prison in 1952, goes to Chicago, Illinois, and joins the Nation of Islam and rises quickly within the nation to eventually become the national representative of the Nation of Islam, which brought on jealousy and envy from other black men within the nation. So the nation at the time, Jason, in 1952, only had 300 members. Now, near the time of Malcolm's death in 1965, it had a half million members. Why is that? Is that because of Elijah Muhammad? No. That is because of Malcolm. Malcolm X built the Nation of Islam. Through Malcolm's charisma, his intelligence, his organizational skills, built the Nation of Islam. No one knew about Elijah Muhammad. Elijah Muhammad was only a picture on someone's wall. Malcolm X built the Nation of Islam and gave the Nation of Islam a face, a global face that would build the Nation of Islam. But you know what happened? And I'm almost done here, Jason. And forgive me for going over time here. But Malcolm X, his pain, and I want you guys to listen to this. The pain of Malcolm X was weaponized by Elijah Muhammad in the Nation of Islam. His pain that he never dealt with from his childhood, from the rejection of his father, because his father emotionally did not know how to love his children, even though he knew verbally or a little verbally loved his children. But through the psychology, Jason, of what we call proximal abandonment, the father, Earl Little, the father of Malcolm X, was physically there with Malcolm, but emotionally, Jason, he was absent. Mm-hmm. Then the psychology of rejection and pain, but not just from his father, but from his mother, really built up a lot of anger and pain that he doesn't know how to channel, No one was there to help Malcolm emotionally. So now the Nation of Islam, through Elijah Muhammad, notices not just the gifts of Malcolm X, the speaking ability, the organizational ability, but also they also recognize the deep hidden pain of a Malcolm Little. Though he was Malcolm X physically, but emotionally, he was still Malcolm Little at age 10 years old. And so this is the reason why that Malcolm X, partly because he was assassinated, because when he left the nation in March of 1964, he didn't know how really to channel that pain. So he began to unwisely expose Elijah Muhammad as a fraud and as a bigamist and having all of these children. Well, Malcolm X, that's because of the roots of Malcolm's pain that was weaponized by Elijah Muhammad.
I wonder, Bishop, if he didn't see aspects of his own father in Elijah Muhammad, in that Elijah Muhammad was obviously not focused on finding one woman that he loved to create a family with and nurture that family, but rather sort of possibly narcissistic, psychopathic, just having sex with as many women as he could get his hands on, including his associates' wives and stuff, which is maybe done in part to humiliate the associate and show dominance over them.
Jason, that is a perfect analogy, and I know we're done here. That's a perfect analogy. Because Elijah Muhammad was a father figure to Malcolm, And then when Malcolm was really going all over the world and telling the world about the greatness of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, the morality of holiness and perfection of Elijah Muhammad, and he begins to find out, Jason, he begins to see cracks in the armor of not just Elijah Muhammad, but the Nation of Islam as a fraud. And Elijah Muhammad having all of these young girls, his secretaries, impregnated. So that had to do something with the psyche of Malcolm Little in the body of Malcolm X being connected to his own father. That's a perfect analogy, Jason. And I know we got the end here, but we're going to pick back up on this next week concerning the eugenics of identity politics. This is so fascinating.
It is. Yeah. It is, Bishop. You're doing a tremendous job, I have to say. You know, Bishop, we're getting some really wonderful comments from a lot of people who are joining us today. We've got Concierge on Periscope is telling us that being welcomed into the fold after being humiliated is cult complicity. It's an interesting comment that causes me to think about a lot of different things. But you know what? I've also gotten some critical comments, which I don't necessarily agree with, but I like to address them so that people can't come back and say that I'm ignoring them. Somebody had accused you of making up words, Bishop, and I didn't think that was correct. You had said some words that I wasn't familiar with, and one of them was historicity. So I looked it up, and of course it is a word. It has to do with the historical authenticity of something. So I just wanted to put out a message to people that certainly challenging anything that the bishop says or that I say or that any of the guests on Crowdsource the Truth say is welcome, and challenging it with facts and evidence is the best way to do it. I just want to remind people that just because you're ignorant of something doesn't mean it's incorrect.
You know what, Jason, has become, again, people saying what the word historicity doesn't exist, or the word or origination. See, the word of God says, my people are destroyed for the lack of knowledge. So concerning the ignorance of people, and I'm not downcasting your listeners, but I'm saying that people are not privy to words, wordology, okay, linguistics, and the psychology of linguistics in connection to dialects and accents. So the term history, historicity, okay, origin, origination exists. Yeah. And all I have to do is begin to study. So again, my job as we close out here is to stretch the educational brains of your listeners, to stretch them spiritually so that their thinking and their thinking processes will never go back to its original shape or form. Yeah. And they're hearing information here. And I got to say this too, that the Nation of Islam Secretary, John Ali, was a top FBI informant during the 1960s. Wow. Okay. So John Ali, who was the National Secretary for the Nation of Islam during the 1960s, the same one who had a national press conference in 63 after JFK's assassination, said that Malcolm X was sat down for a period of 90 days. John Ali was a high informant FBI agent. I wanted to point that out there because that's very important.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting how the FBI was so involved with what they were doing. And then, you know, when you talk about them having, 300 members or 35,000 followers, these are low numbers. I wonder how the FBI feels about people and individuals and groups that have many more followers than that. I mean, we look at things on YouTube and Twitter. People have hundreds of thousands of followers. So if you're sharing ideas or discussing topics that the FBI doesn't like, I wonder what point becomes the trigger moment that they get involved and what their involvement looks like in 2019 versus 1960.
And that's a very important point. Now, remember the term Richard Ford that I made earlier in the broadcast. And remember the Japanese involvement with black organizations and black consciousness movements. During the 1960s, Jason, there was an FBI informant, a Japanese man by the name of Richard Masato Akoi, capital Aoki, that from 1956 to 1972, he had a FBI handle name by the name of Richard Ford, which was also one of the 58 aliases of Wallace Dodd Muhammad. So I wanted to point out that this Richard Akoi supplied weapons to the Black Panther Party. Okay? And so Richard Akoi was targeted by the FBI when he was a junior in high school.
What?
So 1950, yes, from when he was a junior in high school. Why? Because high school campuses are very intelligent. His parents, Jason, was interred during World War II. Yep. Was interred in one of these Japanese camps in the state of Utah from 1942 to 1945. The Topaz, capital Topaz, the Topaz War Relocation Internment Camp, under the directive of not just FDR, but later the U.S. government, interred a lot of these Japanese families, because they thought there was a lot of Japanese spies, and it turned out to be there were a lot of Japanese spies. But anyway, long story short, this Richard Akoi It's saying in the FBI affidavit in 1960 that his father was an actual Japanese intelligence officer or spy through the Black Dragon Society. And so the FBI targets this young man as a junior in high school, okay? President Truman dropped those bombs right after FDR. And President Truman had also created these Japanese internment camps. But this Richard Masato Akoi, A-O-K-I, whose handle name, Jason, was Richard Ford, the same one of the 58 aliases of Wallace, Dodd, Ford, or Muhammad. Right. Richard Akoi provided intelligence and weapons to the Black Panther Party and eventually brought down the Black Panther Party in the early 70s.
You know, and I'll just add one thing, Bishop. This guy, Richard Akoi, something about his look reminds me of some of the images we've been scrolling through of Noble Ali. And I just wonder, you know, there was recently an interview with a woman who was supposedly the master of disguises or the mistress of disguises for the CIA, talking about prosthetic silicone facial applications. I mean, I wonder to what extent this guy's got the same alias. I wonder if he's ever gone undercover in some elaborate Nation of Islam costume where he's pretending to be the guy.
That is so interesting. You should make mention. That's why you're a great host, Jason. And that's why there's a book by Dr. Brent Turner called Islam in the African American Experience. It's called Islam in the African American Experience by Dr. Brent Turner. Brent Turner. He talks about, very interesting, this Richard Akoi being actually a Japanese plant, but used by the FBI to infiltrate many left-wing radical communist and socialist groups, not only in Oakland, California, but it's interesting that when his parents get out of prison, they don't move to a Japanese community in the city of Oakland. They move to a Black community. That's not by accident, Jason. So then, again, it seems like Black America is being used as a political and historical petri dish of the global elite with these, what I call Trojan horses, okay? Trojan horses, talking about Dr. Mufti Siddiq, Muhammad Siddiq, and later the Japanese Black Dragon Society and the Yakuza, and another Trojan horse of H.L. Hunt. Now, I got to say this too, Jason, and forgive me from going over that. Remember the Million Man March, okay, in 1995. Now, the year before, Muammar Gaddafi was going to give Louis Farrakhan $1 billion in February the 3rd, 1994. Right? Louis Farrakhan said he was going to use the money to build Black America. Well, that's a lie. He was going to put it into the coffers of the Nation of Islam, okay? Because back in 1985, Muammar Gaddafi gave Louis Farrakhan $5 million. Okay, so Muammar Gaddafi is another Trojan horse into Black America via Louis Farrakhan and the Nation of Islam. Now, in February the 3rd, 1994, the Clinton administration, through the State Department, denies Louis Farrakhan the $1 billion gift from Muammar Gaddafi for reasons we don't know to this very present day. Now, Louis Farrakhan is in financial trouble now, because he has committed a lot of credit to businesses and to his universities and to his restaurants. Now Louis Farrakhan needs a scheme to bring in money into the Nation of Islam, because he himself has committed financially through credit to banks and businesses all over the United States. So then a year and a half later, he creates another Trojan horse that this time the Nation of Islam is the Trojan horse through the Million Man March.
Wow. Bishop, I hate to cut you off, but we've got a show starting at 3 o'clock with Larry Nichols, so we've got to wrap. But there's so much to discuss. We'll be back next week. I want people to remember that they can listen to you, Bishop. Give everybody the information about the radio shows, if you would, please. Life Radio.
Yes, we are internationally syndicated through their Life Radio Network, 92.9 FM and 1460 AM. You can go to Life Radio NJ, N like in Nancy, J like in Jesus, .com. Again, Life Radio NJ, now in for like a now, J like in Jesus.com, and like /Gaiters. And also you can go to our iHeartRadio network and the iHeart Media Group site of Global Spiritual Revolution Radio. Just go to iHeartRadio and type in Global Spiritual Revolution Radio under the link of podcast, where now we have been so blessed the last 2 years to go into the iHeart Media Group level because we average between 20 to 25 million listeners per week. So
that's amazing.
Those links. So, and absolutely, and those who want to donate to us, and of course, you had that link already also, Jason.
Yes, people can go to paypal.me/GSRR Media Group, and they can make a PayPal contribution to the bishop and support the global spiritual revolution. I hope people will also sponsor Crowdsource the Truth by going to subscribestar.com/crowdsource the truth or patreon.com/crowdsource the truth. Tonight we're going to have a sponsor exclusive show at 8 p.m. with Mike Moore of True Pundit. That's More Pain. And coming up in less than an hour, just about 40 minutes, we've got Larry Nichols. So stay tuned. We'll see everybody then. Bishop, thanks so much for another great show.
Thank you, Jason. We look forward to next week here as we continue the eugenics of identity politics. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Take care.